Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I've got a full preview of an upcoming Tier 8 Soviet premium heavy tank, the Object 252. This vehicle has an absolute monster main armament with 440 alpha damage. That is the highest impact damage of any Tier 8 heavy tank in the game. Combine that with some fantastic, well-armored, thick frontal armor, and you're going to be ricocheting most of your opponents at equal and even sometimes higher tier. And if that's not enough, the thoroughly patriotic tankers out there of you might like its alternative paint job in the form of the Object 252 Defender. So let's quickly run down the stats of this vehicle, compare it to other Tier 8 Soviet premium heavy tanks, and then follow it up with some ace tanker gameplay. So we have the Object 252 here on the left, and don't be alarmed, its font is still in Cyrillic. I guess that's just because it's still being adjusted as it's put into the game. Comparing it to the IS-3A, which is usually available probably about 3 or 4 times a year, the Clan Wars reward premium tank, the IS-5, and also the standard Tier 8 heavy tank, the IS-3. So the Object 252 uses 122mm BL-13 main armament, and while it's the same caliber as pretty much all of the other high-tier Soviet heavy tanks, it actually hits harder, with 440 alpha damage compared to the standard 390. But unfortunately, to be able to achieve this whopping alpha damage, the vehicle has to sacrifice a lot of its rate of fire, down to 3.75 rounds a minute compared to the 4.5 on the IS-3, or even the 5.13 on the IS-3A. And so this means that the DPM of the tank is significantly lower than the other two premium Tier 8 Soviet heavy tanks. And if we also add in the Tier 8 Soviet premium heavy tanks with preferential matchmaking like the IS-6 and also the KV-5, we can clearly see that the DPM of the Object 252 struggles to compete. However, there are rumors that this vehicle is going to be getting a slight rate of fire buff, with its reload time being changed from 16 seconds to 15 seconds, which would increase the rate of fire of this tank to 4 rounds a minute, which would give this a total of 1,760 damage per minute, which is exactly the same as the IS-3. But whether this happens or not, you're going to have to check out on release day, which is meant to be pretty darn soon. Moving on, the shell velocity of these armor-piercing rounds is 1,000 meters a second. Now that's not particularly bad, but it's also not great compared to the IS-3A and the IS-5, which fire standard APCR at 1,400 meters a second, which makes it much easier to engage mid to long range targets, especially if they're moving quickly. One thing that is nice about the tank, however, is it carries 30 rounds of ammunition, and when you consider that your alpha damage is over 10% higher, then that means that you're going to run out of ammunition a little less quickly than on the other Tier 8 Soviet heavies. So how about the weapon handling on the Object 252? Well, it gets 3.2 seconds aim time, which is the same as the IS-5, better than the IS-3A and the IS-3, but the accuracy is right in the middle. 0.44 is better than the IS-3A and the IS-5, which have 0.46, but it's much worse than the IS-3, which is a flat 0.4. And we should also mention that this is not a very good accuracy, and you will be missing a lot of your shots at mid to long ranges with the Object 252. The vehicle's dispersion when moving is a similar story as well. Better than the IS-3A, the same as the IS-5, but significantly worse than the IS-3. And this is repeated again with the turret traverse dispersion, which will impact the aim time of this tank heavily. Better than the IS-3 and the IS-5, but significantly worse than the IS-3. So this means that overall you're going to be aiming much less with the Object 252 than the IS-3A, but because of the fantastic turret traverse dispersion on the IS-3, you're going to spend a little while longer zeroing in that target than in the standard Tier 8 Soviet heavy. Now on to something that I did not expect about the Object 252 when I first played it, and that is that it has better gun depression than the other Tier 8 Soviet heavy tanks at 6 degrees. This is absolutely fantastic. This is the same difference between the Object 140 and the T-62A, those two Tier 10 Soviet medium tanks. And this allows you to be just that little bit more flexible on the ridge lines, and you know how much I love my gun depression, making the vehicle just a little bit more comfortable to play. So how about the mobility of the Object 252? Well, its top speed limit is worse than all of these other vehicles, and while its engine power is significantly better than the IS-3A, it is worse than the IS-5 and the IS-3, and its ground resistances are worse than the IS-3 and the IS-3A, and only slightly better than the IS-5, and albeit on hard terrain, which makes this vehicle probably probably a little bit faster overall than the IS-3A, but much slower than the IS-5 and the IS-3. So now on to the Object 252 strong point, and that is its thick, well-angled frontal armor. 130mm at the front to be exact, 100 at the side and 90 at the rear. This is way better than the hull of the IS-3 and the IS-3A. And while the IS-5 certainly has the advantage down the side of the tank, it has 10mm less on the front. So let's see if it has that armor all over the vehicle. Well, it's got 130 on the upper plate, 140 on the lower plate. Well, that's fantastic, and as we expect, 100 down the side. The back is 90 all over the place, and the side of the turret is very thick, 150, and it's quite well angled. That should provide you with quite a lot of protection. Are there any holes over the front? No, pretty much a very strong frontal turret. The cupolas are 150. Are they going to be easily visible? Oh yes, they're going to be quite easy to hit, unless the vehicle is of course using its gun depression, and then it's going to be significantly harder to hit those cupolas. So how does this armor hold up, considering that this vehicle has a pike nose, a lot like on a 110 or even on the tier 10 IS-7? Well, if we have a vehicle equally in front of this tank, aiming at it, we can see that the upper plate is absolutely monstrous. You are never going to be penetrating this upper plate with anything but the highest tank destroyer premium rounds like on the Jagdpanzer E100. However, unlike the IS-7, the lower plate on this tank is not exceptionally well angled, and so from this angle here, you only need about 220mm of penetration to go through the tank. Whereas the IS-7 is packing more like 240mm of effective armor on its lower plate. But then again, to only have 20mm effective armor less than an IS-7, considering it's 2 tiers lower, makes this thing a frontal monster. But one thing we should notice is just look how high this pike nose goes. That makes it quite hard to hide, and a really big easy shot for the enemy to make, especially at mid to long ranges. And so that certainly is your key to penetrating this vehicle frontally, but you better have about 220mm of penetration to even have a 50-50 chance of going through it. And also be very careful if the vehicle starts to face hug you like this, because aiming down at the lower plate is going to be rather tricky indeed. 270mm of penetration needed. And from here you are absolutely screwed, and a face-hugging Object 252 is going to be able to obliterate most people, and you're going to have to try and aim at those cupolas to be able to take it down. Now everybody knows when you angle the IS-7 to the side here, you actually make the whole of the front plate fairly weak. It goes down to about 250. So surely the pike on the Object 252, a similar thing is going to happen. Well, if you angle the armor as effectively as you can without making the inside drive wheel a major weak point, the whole of the front here is about 230 to 240. That is very thick indeed. We are talking about decent penetrations on tier 8 tanks and higher to be able to go through this armor. And pretty much no tier 6 or 7 tank, even firing premium rounds, is going to have a high chance of going through the Object 252 reliably. And there are also a hell of a lot of old preferential matchmaking tanks, such as the KV-5 and the IS-6, for example, that only have about 217mm of penetration, even with premium rounds, that have no hope in hell at going through the front of the Object 252. But as soon as the 252 over-angles, look at its side armor here, it is very weak indeed. 170mm, you can even track this tank with 200 and go right through it. And so don't think that this thing is going to be similar to an IS-7, which just seems to absorb all punishment, even from the side. So when this vehicle is released, whatever you do, do not sit in front of it and feed it a steel wall medal. Remember, it's got a very long reload. Track it, try and get its side, or hopefully just outmaneuver it and don't waste the shot on its tracks. And then from the side, you're going to be able to penetrate it pretty much every single time, irrelevant of the tank that you're driving. Hit points wise, the vehicle gets a standard 1,500, but it also gets that horrific Soviet tier 8 view range of 350 meters, which means that you're not going to be spotting your opponents at mid to long ranges unless you have an exceptionally skilled crew and you want to sacrifice vents for coated optics. So here we go, we're playing on Muravanka in a very nice matchup indeed. Just under half the enemy team are top tier, tier 8. And remember, those lower tiered vehicles simply don't have the penetration to be able to contest this tank frontally. And that is the key strength of the Object 252, that thick frontal armor. Because let's be honest, you do have to give up quite a lot to be able to get this armor. You have to give up most of the mobility of the vehicle. You also have to give up the rate of fire to have quite a low, well, a really low DPM, especially for a tier 8 premium tank. Even preferential matchmaking tanks are packing like 20% higher DPM than this tank. When we compare it to vehicles such as the Patriot and the Liberté recently, then, you know, it just can't quite keep up with those kind of tanks. So this frontal armor better be darn good to make up for it, right guys? Otherwise nobody's really going to be picking one of these up when they're released very soon. Now, where am I going to be going? Well, I want to protect the cap circle. I guess I could have gone into the woods, but the woods, yeah, I still feel that they require a little bit more than 6 degrees of gun depression to be very effective. Oh god, MT-25. Alright, hopefully he was going faster than me there. I think he definitely was. And remember, it's the tank that's going fastest that has to pay the price of the team damage and also the repair bill. But yeah, I certainly didn't want to do... How much damage did he do to himself? He's lost pretty much... He lost pretty much most of his hit points there. Oh, but a Skoda T25 decides to blitz his way over the slope, a bit like the MT25 on my team. But 478 damage done to him, and that leaves him with precious little left to be able to take on the remainder of my team. And look at this, here we go. Well, where does that one go? Right through the lower plate? Yep. Unsurprisingly, even at those long ranges, the lower plate is a very big weak point against anything that has about 225mm of penetration, and that's exactly what the IS-3 has on the enemy team. And that's a lot like the penetration on this tank, right? I should have mentioned, really, I didn't really talk about the penetration of this tank, I think, in the garage review. And having 225, a lot like all of the other Tier 8 Soviet heavies, certainly is very nice, and it means that you don't really have to dip into the premium rounds in a matchup like this all that often. But if you do want to fire premium rounds in this tank, 265mm is rather nice indeed. Now this FV4202 has certainly got into our lines, and this is where the rate of fire of this gun and the DPM just feels a little bit underwhelming. We'll put a round into the KV3. I want to angle my armor. I'm wondering if the FV4202 is going to shoot me, but instead he decides to kill the Leopard. Will we be able to reload in time to prevent him from shooting us in the side? Well, just about. But all of my friends are dead. Ouch. Looks like that IS-3 got ammo-racked by who knows what. And there you go, the high explosive round starting to come into the tank. Will I be able to find a shot into the IS-3? Not quite. Oh no, disaster. We ricochet off the side of that Oni's boob. And look where he manages to penetrate us. Again, right through the turret ring. Wow, that was a bold play by the Oni. And, well, our armor certainly isn't holding up very well right now, but we are up to 2,300 damage. You certainly don't have to hit many shells to be able to get to a high amount. Now, I realize my driver is dead, but I'm not really too worried about my driver. I only need to go backwards, and my vehicle is limited to 14 kilometers an hour anyway. I'd be more worried about if one of those high explosive rounds hits my loader, hits my commander, or even hits my gunner, and I couldn't aim for anything. Now this is really where the 252 is in its environment. I'm hiding my lower plate behind the dead 4202. These guys are now firing high explosive rounds at me. They're so frustrated with the thick frontal armor on this tank. And just look at these alpha damage bombs we are putting into our opponent. 497 damage to the T28 prototype, 456 against the Oni. I tried to wiggle my turret there, but unfortunately he still manages to put a round right into the cupola on the top. I ricochet the IS-3, and it looks like I've held onto the cap circle for long enough to allow my wealth of team to be able to come from the forest and be able to mop up. But not before we get our fill of damage done, right guys? 4,000 damage. Now I heal my driver, because it's very unlikely that somebody's going to kill another one of my crews without killing my remaining tank. And we haven't really had to see the poor accuracy and the relatively poor aim time of the 252 here, because it's been quite a slow, close range slugfest, and that's really where you want to try and get this tank. When I was first playing it, I think I was trying to engage my opponents at mid to long ranges, and it certainly wasn't working out for me. My recommendation is just to get in the face of your opponents. And unless you're engaging very, very, very tall tanks such as that Oni and they're able to aim down on your cupola, you're going to do exceptionally well. So this is the very next game I played in my Object 252 after the previous round. It's always nice to get a bit of momentum. You want to, or at least me, I want to sign up again and try to experience more of the same, right? And in this kind of a matchup, well, there's a chance, but there are a few interesting moments along the way. So a third of the enemy team are top tier at tier 8, a third mid tier, and a third propping up the bottom at bottom tier. And remember, this vehicle specializes at taking out tanks that have probably about 210mm of penetration, hopefully more around the area of 200, because that means that when you angle this tank perfectly, the beak isn't weak, the side armor isn't weak, and really they don't have any chance of being able to go through you. So let's go down the enemy list and see what the actual threats are. KV-4 certainly a threat if he's got the top 107mm gun. The Lover as well. Revelries not so much. TVP not so much. Scorpion definitely. Chiri, yeah, not at all actually. AMX AC-46, yeah, kind of. E-25, no, not at all. Even with premium, I am going to rebalance that German tier 7 overpowered tank destroyer if I do manage to get my hands on him. So we managed to get this Lover in the back. Oh, this is going to be an easy shot. Yeah, there you go. Easy money. 431 damage. Slightly low roll. You know, I can't get over the alpha damage of this tank. It certainly does feel rather impressive indeed. Will we put another one into the back of his vehicle? Yes, but it was actually a pretty poor shot there. It would have had to have flown true to be able to hit the Lover. But he actually managed to penetrate me. I guess because I was over-angling my armor, I'm surprised it didn't also damage my tracks. But a shot into the side of the 46. You guys got to see a little bit of the poor accuracy of this tank, even at distances of 200 meters, like I'm engaging that Lover. It is rather challenging to hit even large flat surfaces, but there's no doubt I did aim that one rather poorly. We're going to have another swing right through the truck there, hoping that I still had the back of his tank, but it looks like he's turned his turret around and it managed to ricochet. But in comes player 2 in the KV-4, also slipping his way into the middle. Oh, he gives me such an easy shot on the side of his turret there. That's 473. Oh, I know I'm rabbiting on about the alpha damage of this vehicle, but I guess it has to be good, right? Because you do sacrifice a lot to be able to get that alpha damage and to be able to get that frontal armor. And so I'm really hoping that the guy shoots me in the beak right now to the side from here. He's got no chance of penetrating me. I should be okay to be able to take him out. What the hell? He actually manages to penetrate me when I'm side scraping like this? How does he manage to go through the side armor? So a quick look on Tank's GG as to how that KV-4 was able to get me. And it looks like he shot the tracks and then hit the wing under here, and also looks like he probably overmatched the vehicle. That is rather bizarre. That's certainly something to keep in mind, that it looks like the wing on the side of this tank is going to be overmatched by all 91mm caliber guns. So back to it, let's see if we can get revenge on the KV-4. Yes, we can. We're certainly hitting him a lot harder than he's hitting us. His 320 alpha damage pales in comparison compared to our 440. We bounce a Yank Panzer IV there. Will we hit the Revelries? I decide that it's not right to try and take the blind shot at him. That KV-4 looks like he's over-angling, but the Revelries appears again. Oh, 522. That is more like it. That's not even a high explosive round. What are the high explosive rounds on this tank deal? 530? That's actually very weak. No wonder I take so few high explosive rounds in this vehicle. The enemy team are actually doing exceptionally well here. We are, well, after the Jagdpanther clears up the TVP, it's not looking such a good story. We're even 5 kills apiece here. But then again, we have taken out 2 of the enemy's top tier tanks and severely wounded the Lover. So it looks like we have the upper hand. Aiming at this Dicamax, will we be able to hit him? Not sure. We fire one blind. I wish I hadn't now, because there's a Jagdpanzer IV sitting right out in the open. And I'm not too worried about the Jagdpanzer IV shooting my armor here. He's never going to be able to penetrate me. Go on, you can try. Sorry, buddy. Oh, what? Oh, can you believe the shell flew into pretty much the only part of the tank, the mantlet, that would have any hope in hell of ricocheting my shot? And it's so frustrating to have this awfully long reload that you're not able to kind of get yourself justice again by finishing him off. It's an AMX 12T, a Lover, just trying to find the shot. Lover comes forward to block the turret of the 12T, or maybe he, no, actually the 12T's in front of the Lover. I finally figure it out, put a round into the top of his tank. And now I've actually got to be a bit careful because I've got a Scorpion to my side and I notice there's an ARL and also an E25 flanking around. So what I'm going to do is finish off this 12T quickly and then continue to swing my tank around to ricochet shots. But the ARL manages to get one into the back of my tank. Remember, even low tier tanks such as the ARL are easily going to be able to penetrate your side armor if you're not angling perfectly. But now I've got the thick part to the enemy. The ARL doesn't feel like he's flanking me anymore. We finish him off. The Lover puts one into me. I don't have time to turn around and deal with the Lover right now because it's time to rebalance the German. Oh dear, even with premium rounds, there's nothing that guy could do, right? But then again, that's quite often the situation that the E25 finds himself in. So now a Scorpion, 358 hit points. If he manages to penetrate me once, I am dead, but luckily he shoots the outside cheeks. The cheeks even. The outside cheeks. because I don't want to get shot in the beak. Now I have got an exceptionally skilled commander here. Looks like I did ammo rack the Scorpion. We'll have to see if he stays ammo rack. No, he actually just repaired his ammo rack, so I've got to watch out for that. He's got 411 hit points. This shell should be able to kill him, but I whiff it. What a bad shot there. Now, will our 440 alpha damage remove the 411 remaining hit points of the enemy tank? This is my last armor-piercing round. I don't really want to have to dip into my APCR rounds. Oh, God, no. What a low roll. I never thought that 403 damage would be a low roll on a tier 8 premium tank, right, guys? And I'm actually making a mistake here. I'm firing an APCR round. It would be far more economical for me to fire a high explosive round here, but I see that he misses me and I come around the corner for an easy shot to finish off the game, pick up 4,300 damage in 6 minutes and 5 kills. Great result. So far you have seen 2 games where I've been brutalizing tier 8, 7 and 6 vehicles. Now what happens when the shoe is on the other foot? What happens when you're having to handle tier 9s and tier 10s, which pretty much have enough penetration to be able to go through the front of this tank every single time if they aim carefully? Well, I guess I didn't need my gun. I kind of poked my gun out. It's not really the Tiger 2's fault there. So having a go at the pattern, we'll be able to get him. WTF Panzer IV ricochets his round. AMX-50B, will he ricochet? No. Will the T-57 Heavy ricochet? No. The 50B actually bounces one there off the lower plate. Manages to put one through my side. T-57 Heavy ricochets one. Yeah, the AMX-50B managed to penetrate 3 out of 4 rounds against the front of my vehicle, removing 1,048 hit points, and it only required 1 penetration from the T-57 Heavy for that to be all she wrote in the Object 252. And it's certainly in moments like these that you wish you hadn't sacrificed all of your mobility and your DPM to be able to gain some substantial frontal armor, because it just doesn't hold up against 240 millimeters of penetration and higher, unless you can hide your lower plate, which, let's be honest, there aren't that many situations where you can always manage to hide such a pronounced lower plate on a vehicle. And sometimes to try and over-angle the lower plate, you have to give up your 100 millimeters of side armor that is easily penetrated by about, again, 230 millimeters of penetration. And when you do turn the tank to the side, this whole area here on the beak is easily penetrated by the kind of vehicles that we have on the enemy team. And I think this is a point that is very important to make. I could have very easily have just shown you the previous 2 replays where I was top tier, smashing the enemy team, carrying the game and picking up ace tankers. But also when I was playing this vehicle, I got immensely frustrated when I was having to deal with tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, and you just feel that you don't have the DPM to be able to cut through them or at least contest them enough, or really the armor that has any meaning. And in my opinion, you'd be far better off if you were in a Liberté or a Patriot, which have substantially better guns than the Object 252. Well, at least with regards to everything apart from alpha damage, right guys? And one thing we must remember is that this vehicle does not have preferential matchmaking. I'm clearly facing tier 10 tanks here. If I was playing my trusty IS-6, my KV-5, I would never have got into this matchup in the first place. And so what that means is this vehicle has to play a hell of a lot more to be able to get in those kind of games that you saw in my previous 2 replays than vehicles with the preferential matchmaking. And I feel like the games at tier 10 are a lot more drawn out than your tier 6 games, for example. And that can significantly lower your credit grind and be incredibly frustrating for an impatient player. So our first round on Muravanka nailed us a Spartan's medal for ricocheting with less than 10% of our hit points left, a steel wall and a high caliber. What kind of a high caliber and a steel wall is this? 4,392 damage dealt, 2,170, that's a very low blocking steel wall on this tank. We hit every single shell that we fired, and of those 12 penetrated, as you would expect, firing at mostly the sides of the enemy tanks as they came around corners, and also lightly armored vehicles with the 225 millimeters of penetration that we have. So this was 1,427 base experience points for our 3 kills and 125,000 credits profit. One thing that is very nice about this vehicle is that I believe that it has the same or even lower ammo price as the other tanks. Yeah, there we go. 1,025 shell cost, the same as the IS-3 and cheaper than the IS-3A. And considering it has that extra 50 alpha damage, damage, you certainly are going to be making a lot of credits in this tank. Of course, if you manage to penetrate your shells and you don't resort to having to fire those APCR rounds. Next up on Runeberg, another ace tanker for the Object 252, and as we can see, it was played 6 minutes after the previous round. This was 1,313 base experience points for our 4,763 damage that we dealt, and we get another steel wall for how much? 1,305 blocked. Wow, that was probably one of the easiest steel walls I've ever seen. It's a high caliber tank sniper as well. Wow, that's bizarre. I guess I was dealing quite a lot of damage at long range. How many credits do we make? 94,000. This time spending 23,000 credits on ammunition. I guess that's because a few more rounds missed and ricocheted, and I guess I did also have to fire one APCR round at the end when we ran out of AP, but it could have been avoided if I'd fired the high explosive. So all in all, what do I think about the Object 252? Well, I think it's a great tank in a good matchup. In fact, it feels borderline overpowered in a good matchup. I don't think there's really much those tier 6 and tier 7s can do to us frontally. And when you think that you're removing a third of the hit points of equal tiered tanks with every penetration that you make, people probably aren't going to want to take the risk to try and flank this tank or try and track it and lock it in place. But the games that I played in the Object 252 where I was having to deal with those tier 10 matchups and even the heavily skewed tier 9 matchups did feel immensely frustrating. You'll quickly find out that unless you can hide your lower plate, everybody is going to shoot you there, and no matter how well you angle it, the lower plate never goes above about 225mm of effective armor at this kind of an angle. And then as soon as you angle more than that, well, they're just going to shoot the side of your tank. And it will certainly make you wish you were playing the tier 8 French Liberté, which has about 240mm of all-round frontal protection, even slightly higher in some parts. But of course, you have to deal with that awful cupola on top of the tank. So I should finish by highlighting that the vehicle will come in two varieties: the standard Object 252 that you have seen, and also a Defender variant. And the Defender variant has a very patriotic Soviet paint job down the side. We can see there with the Soviet flag, the 252 logo on it, and also down the barrel, as we can see here, this means something like hold the line, I think, which is why this vehicle will be nicknamed the Defender. Both vehicles will cost 11,000 gold and are coming soon, and whether this vehicle is worth it or not, I'm not sure. I guess if I wanted to buy a tier 8 Soviet heavy tank right now and I didn't have any of them, you know what, I'd probably pick up the Object 252 over the IS-6. And I think I would also get the Defender variant of the paint job just for a little bit of novelty. But I can understand why some people wouldn't want to have a big Soviet Union flag down their vehicle. So I think the next question is the Object 252 kind of like a new Patriot? Well, I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and I really don't think it is. See, the thing is the Patriot is pretty much 10% better than the T-32 in pretty much every single way. As however, apart from that amazing alpha damage, I would still rather have the weapon handling of the IS-3. I would rather have the mobility of the IS-3. And I don't think that the armor of the Object 252 is that much better than of the IS-3 to justify sacrificing so many aspects of the tank. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, please consider giving it a like. It really helps the channel out. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Object 252. Do you think it looks massively better than the IS-3? Do you think it looks completely overpowered, better than the Patriot and the Liberté? Will you be looking to pick one up, or will you give it a miss? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.